Welcome to the Undiscovered Gems podcast, hosted by NBA legend and business powerhouse Charles D. Smith, highlighting today's best and brightest business minds.
Hello, welcome back. We are live again with Philip A. Greenberg. You see it on the bottom, Legal Professional of the Year. He is back because we had the first interview and there were a lot of questions. People wanted more information and we were able to get him back. So he's here today to give us more information and impart some wisdom in our audience on matrimonial law. So, Philip, welcome to the show again.
Welcome to you too. Thank you.
All right. Well, Philip, the one thing we left off talking about your tenure in this business, and you've been around a long time. At what point, 20 years, 30 years, at what point did you ever contemplate retiring, and why are you still here?
So that's probably the hardest question you could ask me today. So the answer is I never seriously contemplated retiring. And one is because I'm lucky that I still have my mental and physical capacities. As I think I mentioned the last time, I go to the gym every morning. Last time I was out sick was the beginning of the second Eisenhower administration. At least on my father's side, my father had his marbles till the end, and he was almost 98 when he passed away. So I had that going for me. I will tell you, and this I know I haven't discussed before. I'm 75, by the way. I turned 75 this summer. And in the summer that I turned 70, I ran into a guy who had gone to college with me, didn't become a lawyer right away, but anyway, he's a lawyer now. We were in Atlantic City for continual legal education courses. And he told me, again, he's my age, that he had a plan to retire by the time he was 80. So I said, well, that sounds pretty good. I think I'm going to adopt the same plan. He and I are the same age and whatever. So the only problem is that I'm now midway between 70 and 80, and I still haven't taken the first step. It's just hard when you're a litigator to get an exit strategy, because especially practicing in New York and New Jersey, and this is more a New York problem, cases go on for years and years and years. If you saw the index numbers, you would see that I've had cases that were filed 10 years ago, and it's not like the couple was trying to reconcile. In other words, they've been actively litigating for 10 years or more. It rarely happens in New Jersey. It just happens that the one case like that in New Jersey, I was one of a crowd of lawyers involved. You could probably make a separate show out of that one. So I didn't really it was hard to execute an exit strategy. And even if I wanted to say, okay, I'm just going to finish all my cases and not take any new ones, there are just a lot of cases, and this is my thing, there are just a lot of cases I feel I can't turn down, either because they come from people who may have been my clients for decades, and unless as long as I'm here, they want me to do it. And some new cases come in, or I get referrals from very good referral sources, and at least I feel I can't say no. So I would like to start working down when I hit 80, which is 5 years from now. But as I said before, I'm not even on the first rung of it. And I'll say one last thing, and then I'll let you move on, Charles. law, and I'm sure other people, especially those who are still practicing medicine at 75, dentistry or accounting or whatever, it's a love-hate relationship. I wouldn't tell you that every day. Any lawyer who tells you that he comes in, I put in a basically 11, 12-hour day. Any lawyer who tells you that it's all a pleasure, it's just not so. I don't know what they're doing, because there is a lot of stress, but there are also a lot of high points. Every single day, there are going to be some high points, either a good feedback from a client, a favorable decision from a judge, um, getting to talk to celebrities like you. There's always some high points. So
Mm.
that's why I'm still here. I'm not only able to do it, I am doing it. And some clients who are much younger will kind of kid me about my age, but when they see me on my feet in court, they say to me, I can't believe, from at your age, you really still could do it. So that's why
No,
I'm still here, Charles.
no, that's awesome, and I think everybody who has the ability, because people talk about it, you want to stay active. There's no reason to retire just because you reach a certain age. If you're, like you just said, if you're very capable, why not continue? So, congrats to you.
Thank you.
Um, Philip, the divorce rate, uh, not just in New York, but the divorce rate is really high across America today. And I want to get your perspective. Uh, First, why is that? What's your take? Why do you see that?
Okay, so I'm glad you asked me that, Charles. First of all, the divorce rate in the United States is over 50%. The one thing I will tell you is that it's been 50% for a long time. So
Okay.
at least it's definitely not going down, but it's not going up either. And I don't know if there are any studies out there. I could only tell you anecdotally why I think it hasn't gone down. Then I'll tell you why I think the divorce rate is so high. I think it hasn't gone down because, first of all, people are getting married later. Maybe I'm prejudiced because I married later also. And I just think that uh, once you've really been around a bit, know what you need in another person, get past the idea that physical attraction is enough to carry you through a lifetime. You're
Hmm.
probably a lot more alive. In fact, I once read while I was still a confirmed bachelor that confirmed bachelors make the best husbands. So I think one reason why at least the divorce rate hasn't gotten higher is that people are marrying later. And by the way, don't get me wrong. I'm still I was passionate about my wife, and 27 plus years later, she and I are still passionate about each other.
Nice.
But it's still different from the kind of passion we might have had if we gotten married in the 20s when we were in
Sure.
our 20s. Um, and I also think that people, because the divorce rate is so high, are just either being a lot more careful or just not getting married, especially if they have doubts. So divorce rate is high, but it doesn't seem to be going higher. Now, why people get divorced? Um, the reason I said I was glad you asked me that, Charles, is I was once doing a live cable show. It was called Bugged, and it was kind of a tongue in cheek kind of thing. And the interviewer was divorced himself, and it was unrehearsed, and just like our interview now is unrehearsed. And I had no idea what he was going to ask me. And as I say, it was kind of tongue in cheek. So he said, "Hey, Mr. Greenberg, what's the main reason for people getting divorced? Infidelity, huh? Ha ha ha." And I had never really thought about it. And at that point, I'd already been a divorce lawyer about 25 years. This is several years ago, so about 25 years point. And I stopped and remember this live show. And in fact, my then fiance slash girlfriend, who I wound up marrying, was watching it. And I thought for a moment, and I said no. I said it's not infidelity. It's a matter that the couple, in my opinion, remember I have no psychological, sociological background, were mismatched from the day one. They should have never got. They were not meant for each other. They may have had, and this was my words on live TV. I said they may have had great sex, and they thought that that was love, and that would be enough to carry them
Mhm.
through a lifetime. But they were completely mismatched. I'm not saying 100%, but
Sure.
most couples, even though they will tell you, some will tell you, oh, we had a great marriage for 5 years and then we started to grow apart, or we both started to change in different ways. I'm not saying that never happens. Um, Again, I don't have the psychological background anyway. But in my experience, and I've done hundreds of divorces, I think most of the couples wound up getting divorced because they never should have married each other in the first place.
Wow. Philip, you just triggered a thought because based on what you just said, um, when you get a divorce, you have these legal documents, these
Sure.
structures that help them define what's going to happen through the divorce and afterwards. Why don't we have that at the beginning? Because we go with this spiritual covenant, which is real, but it doesn't give you a written out thoughts and processes for the two getting married and how to move forward with kids and all. It's always on the back end. Why is that? It
Well,
just seems like we should have that.
the answer is, I don't know if you like the answer is, we do have it. That's what
Ah,
that's where prenuptial agreements come in. And
ah,
I will tell you, and a big part of my practice, by the way, is prenups. It's such a big practice that recently I was contacted by a multimillionaire who wanted to retain me for his divorce, and my secretary at a force of habit sent him a retainer agreement for a prenuptial agreement. So of course we had to send him a new one. So prenups are very big. I'll just talk about New York, but I'm telling you, and I do them for New Jersey too. As far as I know, they're big everywhere. Um, and most people, so let me just say a couple things. If I start to bore you, let me know. I'll move on to something else.
no, no.
Most, because people approach it different ways. Um, when I was younger, like when I was about your age, Charles, most of the prenups tended to be people who were in a second marriage. Maybe both of them were in a second marriage. They had children from the first marriage. And their main interest was, and some of them would be senior citizens when they were remarrying. Um, their big concern was they wanted to be able to leave their most or all of their estates to their children from the first marriage, especially if they
Right.
were past childbearing age, so they weren't going to have more children. And so I would say maybe in the 80s, that would tend to be the kind of prenups I would get. But as the 90s became the 2000s and people watch shows like this, um, I get so many now who are first marriages for both of them, no children, and they just want to protect themselves in case things don't work out. And I can go on and on, but I'm going to hit a couple of other things. I had one client. I
One,
was a New Jersey divorce. Um, First marriage for both, very wealthy. I was representing the bride, who was the one with the money, and she had a lot of money in profit, very good job. She owned a lot of property in France. It's strange, but she was born there. She didn't have an accent, um, or much of an accent, and she owned a lot of property in France, and she was very insistent on attaching as an exhibit to the agreement copies of the deeds in French, even though she and I were the only one who uh, read and spoke French. My French not that good, but good enough that I understood the documents. The lawyer for the groom and the groom didn't speak any French at all. But as she was, after they had signed the agreement and she was leaving, and I walked her to the door of my office, she said to me, "You know what I really like about this? Um, we have a roadmap in case things don't work out. And it really, in other words, people know what's going to happen on the other side. And sometimes, not often, in the course of the negotiations, they realize they're not meant for each other. They're in different places.
Mhm.
One of them
Correct.
says, well, when we have children, once a provision, then such and such is going to happen. And the other one will say, oh, we're not having children. So, and it's just amazing. And Charles, and I'm like my wife, I'll say, I could go on and I'll stop, but I don't stop. It is amazing that there are couples that don't have this conversation until after they're married. And had they had it before, and actually, I'm going to give you a quick example, and then I'm say one other thing about prenups, and then we can move on. I had a couple that was married, New Jersey divorce, love, young, relatively young, both attractive, and still in love. And they were getting along very well. They lived together for a few years. Now they were married for a few years. They were getting along very well and still in love. And they were getting divorced. So you would ask me, why were they getting divorced? And I would say, I'm glad you asked me that. They were getting divorced because because things were working out so well, they agreed it's time to start having children. And she said, absolutely. And of course, they'll be raised Catholic. And he
Ah,
said, I think you mean, of course, they'll be raised Jewish. And that's why they were getting divorced, because while they was both still young and attractive and childbearing and everything, he wanted to have Jewish children. She wanted to have Catholic children. And in New Jersey, even when you've negotiated out a divorce, you still do it in person. There's at least one court appearance. And while we were waiting for our case to be called, the two of them were sitting and catching up on each other's family and everything. You'd never guess this is a couple about to get divorced. And when it was over, he gave her a lift back to New York City. They both worked in Manhattan. He didn't give me a lift, his lawyer, back to New York, Manhattan. He gave his then ex-wife. Because in New Jersey, they divorce you on the spot. You leave the courthouse with a certified copy of your divorce. So they walked in single, they walked out divorced. And again, had they had that conversation before,
right.
um,
Yeah.
and so the last thing I want to say about prenups is that it's not just money, even though there's no question money is the most important thing. People say to me, well, can we talk about where we're going to live, what religion we're going to raise the children, how many children we're going to have, are we going to have children, is one of us going to stop working if we have children? And they'll ask me, can we put that in the agreement? And my response is always, as long as you're not agreeing to rob a bank, as long as anything you want to do is legal, you can put it into the agreement. And it's wonderful that they have that conversation before. And yes, sometimes they'll realize that they may be passionate for each other. They may really like or love each other, but they both have different agendas, and those agendas can't be reconciled. So
Wow.
so the answer
Yeah.
is yes, we have prenups. I do believe in it. In fact, one of my taglines, especially in marriage season, in June, if I'm speaking to a group, my closing remarks is, if you don't have a prenuptial agreement, you don't need a lawyer, you need a psychiatrist.
Wow, that's good. Good point. I've always associated, I think most people do, we always associate the word prenuptials or prenup with money.
Mm-hmm.
We don't associate it with, like you just said, other terms about kids and where you're going to live and those sorts of things. It's always associated with what happens to my money. You
Mm-hmm.
know, somebody's coming in
Sure.
with less economically of the other, but never about basic terms. So thank you for answering that. Um, the divorce laws in New York, because you're a New York attorney, but you may know some things nationally. We got a lot of feedback on the LGBTQ
Mm.
industry with laws changing, with marriages and insurance and all those things that come along with it. What do you see? What are some of the hot buttons out there now um, with matrimony as it depends with that group?
Sure. Well, because the main thing I have is same-sex marriages, which is the big
Mhm.
part of that. I have, it's legal everywhere as a result of the Supreme Court decisions a few years ago. Um, and I've done a lot of, speaking of prenuptial agreements, I've done a lot of prenuptial agreements for same sex couples because the same laws apply to same sex couples as applies to
Hmm.
heterosexual couples, and that would even include children because in the old days you said, well, the gay couple, so one thing is they're not going to have children. Well, that's very, very old school. First of all, if it's a lesbian couple, it's quite common that they agree that one of them is going to be impregnated with you know um, anonymous sperm, and they're going to raise the child as joint parents. Well, you've seen these sitcom Modern
Sure.
Family where you have two men. There, of course, there's not unless you have a surrogate, which, by the way, does happen. And a couple of times I was involved where one of the gay men's sperm is donated to a surrogate, and the surrogate carries the child, so it really is his child. But just like on Modern Family, it's quite common they're going to adopt a child. And modern law is that an adopted child legally is absolutely the same as a biological child. There's no
Interesting.
difference in terms of obligations, rights, and obligations. So, so yes, I've done a lot of prenuptial agreements for same-sex marriages. I've done some divorces. The same laws apply. Um, I guess the only twist on it, and it hasn't really necessarily come to play for me, is, as I assume most of your viewers see, and a lot of them potential clients tell me, there still is, even though the law has been written gender neutral at least since 1980,
Mhm.
it still is a certain, let us say, preference for the woman, and definitely in terms of custody. Although I've gotten custody for fathers a lot in terms of support, even though I've gotten alimony and child support for men, it's still not really an even game. But of course, with the same sex couple, even a judge who's openly prejudiced one way or the other in terms of being pro woman, pro man, um, they've got two men or two women in front of them. So
Right.
that's so far for me has been an interesting twist because no one's going to go in with the idea, well, I guess, I'm starting behind the eight ball because I'm the man. Well, if the other side is a man too, then it's not a problem. And the same with women. And by the way, I've also and I don't want to expand your show, but I've done cohabitation agreements for both um, same-sex couples and heterosexual couples, where for one reason or another, either they're not ready to get married or they don't want to get married, but they still want to put certain things in place, especially if they're going to own property together. And if they're really planning to live together for the rest of their lives, they may also want to a legally enforceable commitment that whoever dies first is going to leave something to the other one. And I've done that in both, and same sex and heterosexual. So
Mhm.
basically, same rules. Um, Not that different, Charles. Not that,
Mhm.
at least legally. I mean, sociologically and psychologically and politically, and it may not be the same, but legally, basically the same.
So, thanks for answering that as well. And then I want to ask you a question about, people that get divorced. Is there a certain rate or percentage of people that actually remarry after divorce? And have you, kind of a joint question, and have you dealt with many that are going through their second divorce?
Yeah. So the second part is very easy. It's a strong yes. Our society is full of what I call serial monogamists, and
Mm,
yeah, I have definitely done the second, third, and fourth divorces for some people,
wow.
and it's not just, I mean, because in the old days it was the Hollywood people, but now it's expanded to every possible area.
Wow.
Um, so the answer is yes. And I it's actually a difficult question as to their in some case, every case is different, Charles. By the way, that's the thing about divorce. Every case is different. So some people who are getting divorced the second time, to me, as someone who's only been married once, my wife only married once. We come from a family of almost everyone who's only been married once. Um,
Yeah.
they A lot of times the first marriage was almost a non-event. They got married in college. There were no children. They grew up. They graduated. They went different directions, and they had a relatively amicable, simple divorce. Now they got remarried, had bought a house, had children, the whole thing. And so for some of them, if you listened to them, you wouldn't know, and you saw the stress that they were going through in the second divorce, you wouldn't know that the first divorce had any impact on them. They kind of,
Mm,
almost treated it as like practice. But for other couples who went through uh, brutal first divorces or second or third or whatever number it was, um, a lot of them are more guarded, and they, at least consciously, are trying not to make the same mistakes uh, that they made the first time or the second time around. And sometimes those clients can be pretty difficult
mm.
because they got divorced. And stop me when I start to bore you, Charles. They got divorced, let's say the first time, relatively amicable. Let's say it was a woman and there were no children, and she agreed, even though he made much more money than her, he didn't have to support her, and whatever. They split the bank account, and that was it. And then starts talking to friends, joins a gym, whatever, and so many people are telling her, "Hey, why did you let him off so easy?" And that kind of thing. Sorry about the phone, but I'm all alone here. Um, so. And she may have heard it for years, and now she's on the second time around, and
Mhm.
she doesn't want to go back to the gym and tell the people she's working out with, "Yeah, I let the second guy off easy also."
Right, right.
So, but everyone has different experiences. So, um, for me, it's basically, a non-issue. With Charles, it's like the rest of life. You dealt a hand, and it's your job to play it the best you can.
Right.
As the Rogers song goes, every hand's a winner, every hand's a loser. So
Roger.
it's up to you, and your lawyer, to take the hand that you've been dealt, and make it a winning hand.
Philip, it happens over and over. You're giving so much information to our audience, and I look, and the time just sails right by. I want to get one more. I want to get one more question in before we depart. If you can answer this briefly, do you see any nuances or any laws potentially changing uh, based on divorce or marriage that our audience may not be aware of? Is there anything happening in the court system?
Yes. And again, that's a good question, and you're going to run way over if I give you a fulsome answer, but I'll give you a short answer. First of
Okay.
all, a little bit about practicing in New York and New Jersey. Um, as you know, they're not very far from each other. It is amazing how different uh, practices in both. That's why a lot of lawyers who admit in both states still only practice in one, especially if it's matrimonial, because it's so much work to keep up. The big
Hmm.
difference in as a general, and then I'll hone in for you, Charles, is that New Jersey is constantly changing its law. It is every year or two there's some major change in New Jersey divorce law. In New York, they can spend a decade debating over a change in the law, and a lot of times after spending a decade debating over it, they don't change it. So in New
Hmm.
York, most of the big shifts are that the New York Court of Appeals, the highest court, uh, in effect changes the case law that previously existed and previously everyone was following. So that in New York, it's particularly important to follow the case law because that's really, in general, where big shifts. I mean, there've been a couple of major shifts in New York, but it's in New Jersey, it's like every year or two. And let me just rattle off a couple. I don't know how much time you have. Um, one I think interesting. New Jersey is considering one of the basic tenets of divorce. Not to be morbid, is that if one of them dies before you're divorced, you can't get divorced anymore. You have to have two live people to get divorced. Um, New
Hmm.
Jersey is currently considering a law where, under at least under certain circumstances, if one of them dies, the estate can continue and finish the divorce. If it would be unjust to the surviving party if the divorce process ends because the other one died. That's being considered very seriously. One or two
Wow.
others being not just considered but adopted. And again, Charles, you're so much younger than me, so times have changed. There was a time alimony was lifetime until remarriage. So, in theory and sometimes in practice, a man could get divorced at 25 and still be paying alimony at my age, 75,
Right.
and it's lifetime. So, as long as she's alive and you're alive and she hasn't remarried, you had to keep paying. So what New Jersey did is they adopted a law that there would be a presumption that if you're retirement age, you support regardless of what the divorce decree says. If you're retirement age, there's a presumption that your support obligation will be reduced or terminated. And they were also way more modern in terms of joint custody and child support. Their child, not to give a pitch to New Jersey because I so love New York, um,
Right.
but their law in terms of custody, visitation, and child support are so more realistic than New York's. So anyway, so those are the kind of things to look for. I guess the last thing I'm going to say on this, be sorry, is I did have a client come in. He was separated from his wife. His wife had moved out of their New Jersey home, and she was living with one of their daughters in Brooklyn. He was still living with the other daughter. Both children were minors in
Hmm.
New Jersey. And so he had a choice: should he file for divorce in New York or file for divorce in New Jersey? So I took out a pen. I remember it was a Sunday afternoon. I wasn't dressed like a lawyer. By the way, I don't dress like a lawyer on Sundays. And I wasn't dressed like a lawyer, but I still thinking like a lawyer. Took out my legal pad, did a quick, as accountants say, back of the envelope computation, and I showed him that his child support obligation would be, same two daughters, would be twice as much if he got divorced in New York as if he got in New Jersey. So surprise, surprise, he and I filed for divorce in New Jersey. So it does make a difference. And sometimes it's not only an intellectual difference, you may actually have a choice. So anyway, so it's good to have a lawyer who knows both, especially if one of you in one state and one is in the other, and you actually have the option. Maybe the most important decision, I still think the most important decision you make is your choice of lawyer, but maybe a close second to that, if you have the option, is which state you file for divorce. Nice. So that's my spiel.
Ladies and gentlemen, audience, yep, we got a little latency here, but ladies and gentlemen and audience, had a lot of questions. We got a lot of information on matrimonial law. Thank you, Philip A. Greenberg, New York's Legal Professional of the Year, for your wisdom. Thanks for your time. And I'm sure we'll get some great feedback on this one also. Thank you, Philip.
Great. Well, thank you for everything, Charles, and everyone have a great day.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Undiscovered Gems with our host, Charles D. Smith, highlighting today's best and brightest business minds. Brought to you by Pods Entertainment Group.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, I mean, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house.
And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned.
This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.